Good evening, spooks. My name is Jess, I put the J in JT Reads, and today we're going to be wrapping up my reading month of June. It was an interesting month. Let me show you the stack. I'm not confident my weak wrists can hold this, but look at the size of some of these chunky books. That third one down may not count because I only read 2 of the short stories in it, but oh my god, I need to put this down. The reason why this was an exceptionally interesting month is because every single book I read in June, of which there were 6, they were all fantasy books in one way or another. So not always adult high fantasy, but in one way or another, all those books were fantasies. I wouldn't even say I'm a fantasy reader, yet here we are. And some of these were rated very highly. Some of them were not. But we'll get to that. Let me give you the stats. So first up, I read 6 books, as I said, in the month of June, 6 of which were fantasy books. I read a total of 1,645 pages, but some of those were comboed with audiobooks. I didn't listen to an entire audiobook by itself at any point this month, which is very strange for me, but I did combo read on a couple of these, the biggest one especially because I needed the motivation to continue. And my average rating across the board was 3.8 stars. So, okay, a goodish month. Let's jump straight in with the first book. When I say the first book, this is not in any particular order other than size. First up, I read Stardust by Neil Gaiman, and everybody I know seems to rave about Neil Gaiman. I read The Ocean at the End of the Lane and enjoyed it. I have read Coraline and obviously enjoyed that and the movie too. I started reading Trigger Warning and didn't really get on with it very well, so I wasn't really sure what to expect when I went into this. This is a young adult fantasy adventure novel, and I haven't seen the film either. I have now, but before reading it I hadn't. I only watched the film because I liked the book so much. I read this book for my TBR game prompt I've owned for a long time, and I have zero recollection of buying this at all. So I believe I've owned this for upwards of maybe 10 years. It has moved many houses with me, and I have no idea where it came from or why I have it. I rated this 4 stars, and I did really like it. It was just a nice whimsical journey, and it just wasn't that deep. I tabbed a whole one thing, but it's quite a nice quote. I liked what he did with his wording here. I think for the most part I was just whisked up with the story and didn't stop to tab anything. Not that there wasn't anything beautiful to tab, because there definitely was. I was just caught up in the story. If you've read the book or watched the film, we're talking about Ditchwater Sal, and she says, "You may call me More One Egg," said the witch instead. It was, she reflected, almost a joke, for More One Egg means wave of the sea, and her true name was long since drowned and lost beneath the cold ocean. I thought that was very sweet and well written, and got me in my feelings. Next up, for the prompt, published over 10 years ago, I read the sequel to Howl's Moving Castle, which is Castle in the Air by Diana Wynne Jones. I rated this 3 stars, and it's not because the story wasn't good. The story is essentially Aladdin, which is obviously taken from Arabian Nights, as this is. So I kind of knew roughly the story, and I wanted to see how it tied into Howl's Moving Castle, which towards the end it did. However, the reason why I couldn't rate it any higher was because it was very, very fatphobic. All the way through, pretty much. It was kind of uncomfortable in parts. So it was never going to be any higher than a 3 star, even if I found the story and the writing incredible. It was never going to get any higher than 3 star for that exact reason. But it'll be very interesting to read the 3rd in this series to see whether that sort of problematic behaviour continues. I couldn't tell whether the character was written deliberately that way or whether these were just prejudices that the author has. would be very interesting to know either way, because I felt like we were supposed to be rooting for the main character, but I very much struggled because he was rude. So a little bit of a disappointing read, but I enjoyed how the story tied in with Housemoving Castle towards the end, and yeah, I don't have much more to say on this one. I have a video coming out in the next month or two where I will talk about this in more depth, and I'll tell you more about that another day. Next up in June, I read The Borrowers, the first story of 5 by Mary Norton, and this was not for any TBR game prompt, this was just for fun, and also for another future video that's coming out soon. No spoilers. I rated The Borrowers 4 stars, and I knew I was going to enjoy it because I love the film Arrietty. I've never watched the TV series The Borrowers, and I think there's also a film called The Borrowers. I've never seen that either, but I knew the storyline roughly because I've seen Arrietty, and I love it, by the way. So I knew I was going to enjoy the gist and the plot and the story, and I really did. It was very cozy, autumnal sort of read, even though we are in the depths of summer. I really enjoyed it. It felt like just a easy, good time. My copy is very, very sweet too. The cover is lovely, but it is falling apart. As I said a minute ago, there's another video coming out soon where I go into more depth, so for now, I'll be quiet. Next up, I read The Borrowers Afield. I read the second one too, in the same month, and the difference between the first and second one was very interesting setting-wise. The first one, as I said, was very autumnal. The second one was like a rainy summer day. It was fantastic to read when I was sitting downstairs with the doors open and the sun was shining. It just felt so summery and lovely. And here's the thing, this could have easily been a 5-star read for me because the writing is beautiful, the descriptions are lovely, it's so atmospheric and whimsical and tender, but it is a product of its time, and that is not an excuse. This is written by a white person in 1952, and it shows. It's problematic in some ways. It is classist, it is racist. There are some hints of problematic attitudes throughout the book, which made it uncomfortable to read at times, and it really took you out of the story. It was so unnecessary, and it's obviously just a reflection of the times and the author's prejudices at the time. I hope not now. Is Mary Norton still alive? Possibly not if it was written in the 1950s. But yeah, it really brought the rating down. It's not openly offensive, but it's still inexcusable. So we'll continue. I'll see if the stories start to improve as I go on into next month. I actually read the second story for my TBR game prompt, a story ending in an odd page number, and that was not my original plan. If you watched my TBR game for June, I was supposed to read this. I had a bad time with books that were just offensive and not as a plot point. Do you know what I mean? If there is an offensive character, okay. This just gave me some red flags, and it was boring, which is so annoying because I really liked the first one and I thought that I was going to really enjoy the second one. The covers give such autumnal, cozy, magical vibes, but there was just nothing of interest in the plot for me at all, unless you were really invested in the romance, which I just wasn't. And there is a part in this, I continued on after this, but there is a part in this where the male main character pretends to be gay, and the words used around that subject were just red flags everywhere. And in Pride Month, no less, we're not doing this to ourselves. So I just DNF'd it. I don't care. It's fine. I'm just going to, I think I maybe got 20% through. I'm just going to donate it somewhere and someone else can try it. It wasn't hideous. It just didn't sit right with me. So I DNF'd this one and read The Borrowers Afield instead. Also problematic. Great. After all of that drama, I finally can tell you I read something great. And did I have any doubts whatsoever that this was going to be a killer? No, I did not. The Silence Factory by Bridget Collins. I didn't read this as part of my TBR game, I just read it because it was brand new and I was so excited to read it. And this was a 5-star read for me. Bridget Collins cannot do any wrong in my eyes. She writes romance between two men like nothing else I've read before. They are so realistic and the characters are so well rounded, the romances are so... You're so invested in the romances. So the romance in this one between the two men, I won't give any spoilers, but you're not really rooting for it. You kind of are, but you're kind of not. I'll say no more on that. However, there is also a romance between two women in this one, and that is stunning, perfect no notes. There is some Greek mythology weaved through this, which is very subtle, but really adds to the story. It's very accessible as well. If you have no knowledge of Greek mythology, you don't need it for this. It's just really, really good. Let me tell you some quotes. The sad portion of the video is over, okay? We're at the good stuff now. Let me read to you this quote that I tabbed 6 pages in, and I knew we were off to a great start. I wish I had launched myself out of the boat. Desperate and ill as I was, I would have made landfall or drowned. But I had not the presence of mind. I was carried like a good wife on the tide of another's desire, even though it bore me away from everything I held dear. Does that not rip apart your soul? Because it ripped apart mine. You root for this woman like no other. Isn't this quote just so tangible? There was a little silence then, as though the word silence were a flask that had been broken and let its essence spill into the space between them. Tangible. So obviously there's a lot of talk in this book about silence and noise. I won't tell you much more on that, but clearly. Noise is the scourge of our age, gentlemen. It is the dark shadow of progress. We mustn't yearn for the days before technology or become nostalgic for a past that was poor, unhygienic, and devoid of modern comforts. But we must not close our eyes or ears to the reality, which is that noise is as damaging to our senses as the smoke and stench of bad air, seeping into our homes and poisoning our lives. Does that not make you want to just go out into nature and listen to some trees blowing in the wind? Without giving spoilers, this is a quote on the subject of the women and their romance. Okay? Trying really hard not to give spoilers. We danced, I think. We danced and sang, and we rode through eternity on the back of a single night. What? We rode through eternity on the back of a single night. That put words to a feeling that I have not been able to describe ever before. Wow. Okay, this quote is kind of long, but it's the last one, and it is so profoundly upsetting, but also powerful and great. So let me just give you the whole quote, please. My baby bides her time. She is quiet and careful, and when she moves, it is only a fluttering of her tiny fingers, so gentle it might be mistaken for a rumbling in my guts. I am glad. The world likes us best when we are docile and silent, and we do not take up more space than necessary. Later, I will teach her to be sly and find her own way without seeming to resist, like water that slips out of a man's cupped hands. She will do everything that I cannot. And on that note, wow, 5 stars, unbelievable. It was a sort of book where I closed it, stared into space for a second, immediately knew it was 5 stars. I think as soon as I started, I knew it was gonna be 5 stars, and then got unbelievably sad because this is brand new, which means if there's another book from Bridget Collins, it's not going to be anytime soon. And I just have to wait. It was so good. If you take nothing else from this video, please read this book. Thank you. I probably should have ended with that book, but whatever. The last book that I read in this month was The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. This was too long for me. Too long for me. Don't enjoy when books are this long. Some people live for that stuff. I do not. This was a slog. I rated this 3 stars, and it was so hard to rate because immediately when I finished, I had that serotonin boost of I've just finished not only a book in general, but a massive book. I completed a fantasy book. Do you know what I mean? That sort of feeling. But when I actually sat on it for a while, I was like, did I enjoy this? Not really. Was this clever? Yes. Undeniably, this is a very clever story, a clever world building, clever history, well written, but I didn't like it. And so I think that's more on me than the book itself. I do think it could have been shorter. I don't think it needed to be as long. There is a sequel, and I do wonder whether this could have been split over more books. It was a lot of information to take in one book, but I don't know whether that is just a adult fantasy thing and whether I am the problem. That would be a plot twist, wouldn't it? But I did enjoy it. I just wasn't always following, wasn't always enjoying it. I will say, for a chunky fantasy, it was quite accessible in that the chapters are quite short, there's different POVs, so you're never stuck on the same storyline trajectory for too long, and it wasn't too complicated world building wise. It was given to you in dribs and drabs, which I prefer in a fantasy. If you're giving me 100 pages up front of world building, I can guarantee I've lost interest and I am lost. So I'm not going to give you too much premise of the story, because if you're interested in reading it, then go and read it. But these people are living in a library which is described as unimaginable size-wise. It is the size of a mountain, which is imaginable. But that is a direct quote, okay? It says it's unimaginable in size, and then it also relates it to the size of a mountain. But that's towards the end of the book, so maybe they discover it's the size of a mountain. Irrelevant. It's really big. Big library. Never-ending, lots of different rooms. And that is incredibly interesting and exciting to me. But where the story lacked, for this many pages, there was no description. I wanted beautiful, lengthy descriptions of a ornate, gorgeous library, and I did not get that. And that hurt me, because this, sir, you have in your hands a story that could crush and heal me in equal measures. This could have been a 5-star if there was just some deep descriptions of beautiful stuff so I can picture myself in this library. I really struggled to picture anything. There was no movie playing in my head for this, and that was kind of disappointing. There were 2 major plot twists that I can think of, and one of them I guessed, which is shocking for me because I don't try to guess plot twists, and rarely do I accidentally stumble upon them. So that was a little bit disappointing for me. But the second plot twist, I did not see that coming, and that was very well done. So credit where credit is due, this is a very interesting book, and I think if you were fantasy inclined, you would enjoy this. It isn't particularly my genre, and this wasn't particularly my cup of tea, so it was a 3-star read for me. And that, my friends, is the 6 books that I read in June. Some chunky ones in here, and a lot of fantasy, but a single sentence of horror. I need to rectify that in July. My July TBR game will shortly be released, so you'll see that in the next few days, but until then, as always, if you have any recommendations for spooky books or fantasy books that are accessible to people like me who don't get on well with books that are longer than 300 pages and don't like a lot of world building up front, please drop them in the comments down below. But otherwise, I'll catch you in a video very, very soon. Bye bye! Let me show you a place.